Hey guys, welcome back to Well That Didn't Work's Basics of Crafting. By now you've completed the first episode and you know what you need to buy and you've had a chance to run out and grab it. So what we're going to talk about today is the basics of foam and how to cut it. Stick around. There's a bunch of different types of foam, but we're only going to talk about one today because that's what we're going to use when we go through the basic crafting series. That's called XPS foam. That's extruded polystyrene. All you really need to know about it is that it's insulation foam. It's thicker, it's denser, and it holds textures better, which is why it works for crafting. Where I'm at, I have two different places that I can go get it. One is our Lowe's hardware store, and one is a Home Depot hardware store. Home Depot sells this pink version. It's a little bit more dense, and it will hold your texture better. Unfortunately, you have to buy very large sheets of this, and it's a little bit thicker. And I get this blue version at Lowe's. It's by Dow. It's a little bit thinner. It's got a little bit more bounce back to it, which means it's not going to take texture quite as well, but it does cut easier, and I can cut it thinner. A word of caution though, regardless of where you get your insulation foam at, some of the foams do have a lining that comes on top of it. It's a thin film. You have to peel this film off. If you don't, it won't take texturing and it won't take your paint. On a side note, there is one last product that you may want to know about, and that's your standard foam board that you can get at Walmart. If you peel one side of the paper off of that foam board, you have that same XPS foam as the interior liner. This is going to help you out a lot in the crafting world. Just keep that tip in mind. All right, enough yapping. Let's head over to the workbench, and I'm going to show you how to cut and work with this foam.
The first thing you're going to need is your metal ruler, your razor blade, and your fine tip Sharpie. To cut the foam correctly, obviously make a straight line using your Sharpie and your metal ruler. Only set out part of your blade and make sure that you start your cut before you make contact with the foam or you will get tears in it. Repeat this process again after extending the blade, and you may have to do this 3 to 4 times in order to get a good clean cut edge. Make sure you apply pressure and drag it as vertically as possible across the edge of the metal ruler. If you do this with a wooden ruler, you're very likely to end up damaging your ruler and not being able to use it as a straight edge. With the thicker, denser foam, you're going to do the exact same thing. However, this may take anywhere from 3 to 5 passes to cut. If you have a squared off cut like this, it's very important that you start before the foam and end after where your mark is made. But don't worry, as you go through this, you're going to end up with quite a bit of foam that's left over that you can use in various parts of your projects. So it won't be scrap. Now let's explore a couple of other tool options. Your standard box cutter. This retractable blade box cutter is not going to do well for you when it comes to cutting foam. An X-Acto knife. This will work on foam, but only if it's very thin, small pieces. Then you have your retractable lock blade. Yes, this is also a box cutter, but that thicker blade works much better. Then you'll need some form of straight edge. I know I'm showing you the plastic one right now, but in the long run, a metal ruler is going to work much better. I pre-cut this piece of foam so that you could see the dimpling that happens with the box cutter. Now I took a little bit more time when I pre-cut using the X-Acto knife, but you can still see how it got a little bit off, and you could see the chunks that were pulled out of the middle of that foam. And finally, you see the last edge, where I used my retractable blade cutter. It's a much cleaner cut. I'm going to take you through on a smaller piece here and let you see. First up is the box cutter. And I am going quick to kind of exaggerate the final effect, but it'll show you. You end up with a lot of chewed up center of your foam. And just to show you again, I'll make sure that I try and cut through as much as I can on one side and then break it off, and you'll see, again, a lot of chewed up foam. The X-Acto knife. First pass, and it seems like this knife cuts very, very easily and very well. However, once you get around and you cut through some of these thicker foams, you're going to see exactly what happens. You get a couple of clean areas, but then you get where the blade doesn't match up because it can't make a clean, solid cut. That's why it's best for smaller foam. Now the retractable blade. You'll see I'm using the same technique where I extend the blade partially, make my first cut, Then I extend the blade again and continue this process until I've made it all the way through the foam. And voila, a clean cut. Now here's a side-by-side of the final cuts. I figured I'd be doing you a disservice if I didn't take you through some form of hot wire cutting. So I'm going to use this blue XPS foam, which is the thinner version, first. Mark a straight line, and then I'm going to take the hot wire tool that I showed you to get from Walmart that's only a few dollars with a 2.4 amp charger on it. Just like I did with the retractable box blade, I'm going to start before the piece, and I'm going to start slowly working my way through. Now as you get into this cut, the hot wire is starting to lose its temperature, and it makes the cut more difficult. I realized about 3/4 of the way through that I wasn't cutting the entire piece and had to make a second pass. Now there at the end, you can see that the foam melted and started to generate some strings. And it did not turn out to be as clean of a cut as I had originally hoped. Now let's try a thicker piece of the pink XPS foam. This was already pre-marked, so I decided to just go ahead and lay the metal ruler down and start the same process over again, with a little bit more pressure and attempting to go as slow as possible to cut through this thicker piece in one swipe. I will say that if you choose to do this method, please use a metal ruler. You will end up burning your wood ruler. I pulled the tool away pretty quick, but I did end up with the same issue where it did start to melt the foam enough that I did get some strings that were pulling off to the side. On this thicker foam, it did cut a little cleaner, but you can see that the heat from the tool did leave waves in the foam. When you get to painting, that could leave some undesirable textures. All in all, if you ask me what my preferred method is, I'm going to use the retractable blade box cutter. That is, of course, until I eventually am able to get myself a Proxxon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in part 3 where you're going to learn how to properly size, carve, and texture this foam into usable gaming tiles.